Ko Tanaka's fingers trembled as she gripped the rusted railing. The lice in her hair were crawling again, burrowing deeper into her bleeding scalp. But she barely noticed anymore. After 18 months, the constant itch had become part of her existence, like breathing or hunger. What terrified her now was the coastline emerging through the fog. San Francisco, America, the enemy. The propaganda officer's words echoed in her mind from 2 years ago, spoken to a room full of young nurses in Manila. If the Americans capture you, they will do things so terrible, I cannot speak them aloud. Death would be a mercy compared to what awaits you in their hands. She had believed him then. Standing on this transport ship in March 1945, watching the Golden Gate Bridge materialize like a ghost through the mist, she believed him still. But belief wouldn't change what was about to happen. The transport had crossed the Pacific in 16 days. 16 days of rolling seas and cramped quarters. Of 47 Japanese women huddled together in spaces never meant for human cargo, whispering their fears in the darkness. They were nurses, teachers, radio operators, clerks, ordinary women who had served their country and now faced the consequences of being on the losing side. Some had been captured in the Philippines when Manila fell. Others came from Saipan, from Guam, from tiny outposts that had been swallowed one by one as American forces pushed westward across the Pacific like a relentless tide. Ko was 23 years old. Her uniform, crisp white with red crosses, was now gray with dirt and sweat, the fabric thin enough to see through in places. She had worn it for 3 years without replacement. 3 years of running from cave to cave, treating wounded soldiers with supplies that ran out in the first year, operating without anesthesia, watching men die because she had nothing left to save them with. The worst part wasn't the dying. The worst part was how quickly she had stopped feeling anything at all. Now, approaching enemy territory with nothing but the clothes on her back and the lice in her hair, emotions were rushing back with a vengeance. Fear, mostly. But also something unexpected. Curiosity. What would they do? The propaganda had been so specific, so detailed in its horrors. Would they really do those things? Or was it all lies designed to make them fight harder, die rather than surrender? She would know soon enough. The ship was slowing. Commands echoed across the deck in English, harsh and incomprehensible. Ko understood perhaps 20 words of English, most of them medical terms. The words washing over her now meant nothing, except in their tone. Efficient, businesslike, occasionally sharp. The American sailors moved with practiced ease around the ship, calling to each other, laughing occasionally. Laughing. Ko found that more unsettling than anger would have been. How could they laugh when they were about to receive prisoners? What did that casual normality mean for what came next? The ship docked with a grinding shudder that ran through the entire hull. Ko's stomach lurched. Though whether from the motion or terror, she couldn't say. Around her, the other women began to gather their meager belongings. A small cloth bundle, a photograph, creased and fading, a wooden comb, missing half its teeth. These were the sum total of their possessions. The physical evidence of lives that had been full and normal once. Ko clutched her own bundle, a spare undergarment, and a letter from her mother she had carried for 2 years without reading again. She knew what it said. The paper would disintegrate if she unfolded it one more time. Footsteps approached, heavy boots on metal decking. An American officer appeared at the hatchway, his uniform crisp despite the sea voyage, his face carefully neutral. He spoke in English, then waited, while another man, Japanese by his features, but American by his uniform, translated. You will form a line and proceed onto the dock in an orderly fashion. You will not be harmed if you follow instructions. The translator's voice was flat, emotionless, but Ko heard something underneath it. Embarrassment? Pity? She couldn't tell. They moved toward the hatch, a slow, shuffling line of exhausted women trying to maintain some dignity. Ko was near the middle of the group, neither first to face whatever awaited nor last to avoid it. The translator's words echoed, "You will not be harmed." But they had been told the opposite for so long. "So you will not be harmed, Doc." Which truth should she believe? The gangplank was steep and narrow, salt-worn wood that creaked under each step. Ko kept her eyes down, watching her feet, trying not to think about what waited at the bottom. American soil. Enemy territory. The place where terrible things happened to captured women, if the propaganda was true. A woman in front of Ko stumbled. Ko reached out instinctively to steady her, and for a moment their eyes met. The woman was older, perhaps 40, her face lined with exhaustion and something deeper. "Whatever comes," the woman whispered in Japanese, "we face it together." Then she straightened and continued down. At the bottom of the gangplank, a group of American soldiers waited. Not the Marines Ko had expected. Hard-faced men with rifles at the ready. These were Army personnel, medical corps insignia visible on their sleeves. They stood in a loose formation, not threatening but not welcoming either. Professional. Clinical. The first woman off, the gangplank was led to a waiting truck. Not pushed, not grabbed, just directed with a gesture and a few words from the translator. Then the next woman. Then the next. Ko's turn came. An American soldier, couldn't have been more than 19, gestured toward the truck. His face was pink, with sunburn, scattered freckles. Across his nose, he looked as nervous as she felt. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second before he looked away, uncomfortable. Ko climbed into the truck bed, wooden benches along each side. Canvas cover blocking most of the daylight. Other women were already there, pressed together, not speaking. Ko found a space and sat. The truck smelled of diesel fuel and old canvas, overlaid with the unwashed odor of women who had crossed an ocean without bathing. Ko no longer noticed her own smell, but she noticed the collective weight of it in this enclosed space. The truck's engine rumbled to life. They were moving. Through gaps in the canvas, Ko caught glimpses of San Francisco. Buildings taller than anything in Manila. Cars everywhere, despite the war. People on the sidewalks going about their business, unaware or unconcerned that enemy prisoners were passing by. The normalcy of it was staggering. This city hadn't been bombed. These people hadn't starved. The war had touched them so lightly they could laugh on a Tuesday morning, while Ko and her companions had spent years in caves watching their country burn. The truck ride lasted 20 minutes, winding through streets that all looked the same to Ko's foreign eyes. Finally, they stopped. The engine cut off. Voices outside. American voices speaking in that efficient tone. The canvas flap at the back was pulled aside, flooding the dim interior with sudden bright light. Ko squinted against it, trying to see what awaited them. Buildings. Low, sprawling, military in their utilitarian design. Barracks, perhaps, or hospitals. The architecture gave nothing away about their purpose here. Women began climbing down from the truck, helped by American soldiers who offered hands that most of the prisoners refused. Ko took an offered hand. Not from trust, but from exhaustion. Her legs had cramped during the ride, and the jump down was further than it looked. The soldier steadied her, then immediately released her, and stepped back, maintaining that professional distance. They were being herded now, politely but firmly, toward the nearest building. A woman in a white uniform appeared, stepped back, maintaining that professional distance. They were being herded now, politely but firmly, toward the nearest building. A woman in a white uniform appeared, not a soldier but clearly medical personnel, a clipboard in her hand. She spoke to the American officer, who nodded. Then she turned to face the prisoners. The translator stepped forward. "You will undergo medical examination. This is standard procedure for all arriving prisoners of war. You will be treated with respect and dignity. Medical examination. Ko's stomach dropped. Images from the propaganda filled her mind unbidden, but the woman in white was already gesturing them toward the building's entrance, her manner brisk but not unkind. They filed inside. The building's interior was startlingly clean. White walls, white floors, the sharp smell of disinfectant cutting through the odors Ko had grown accustomed to. It had been 18 months since she had seen anything this clean. 18 months since she had been anywhere that smelled like something other than sweat, blood, and rot. The contrast was dizzying. They were separated into smaller groups. Ko found herself with 6 other women, led by a different nurse, into what looked like a classroom. Chairs arranged in rows, a blackboard on one wall, posters showing anatomical diagrams. The nurse gestured for them to sit. Ko chose a seat near the back, old habits from school days asserting themselves despite everything. The other women scattered throughout the room, none wanting to be in front, all seeking the illusion of invisibility. The nurse left. They waited, in silence, the only sound, the ticking of a clock on the wall and the occasional rustle of movement. Ko studied her hands, noting how the skin had thinned over the bones, how her nails were ridged and discolored from malnutrition. 18 months of inadequate food had left marks more subtle than starvation, but no less real. The door opened. The woman in white returned, accompanied by the translator and another woman, this one older, perhaps in her 50s, wearing the same white uniform, but with additional insignia that suggested rank. The older woman spoke in English, her voice carrying authority tempered with something Ko didn't expect: patience. The translator converted her words. My name is Captain Morrison. I am a physician with the United States Army Medical Corps. You are here for medical evaluation and treatment. This is not punishment. This is healthcare. Healthcare. The word sounded alien in this context. Ko had spent 3 years providing healthcare in conditions that made a mockery of the term. What did these Americans, with their clean facilities and abundant supplies, know about healthcare under fire? Captain Morrison continued. Each of you will receive a thorough physical examination. We will document any injuries or illnesses and provide treatment. You will be tested for infectious diseases. You will receive necessary vaccinations. Most importantly, you will be deloused and provided with clean clothing, deloused. The word cut through Ko's consciousness like a knife. For 18 months, the lice had been her constant companions, driving her to the edge of madness with their endless crawling, their biting, their breeding in every seam of her clothing. The idea that this torment might end seemed too enormous to believe. Around the room, Ko saw the same realization hitting the other women. One began to cry, quiet tears that she didn't bother to wipe away. Another's hands were shaking so badly she had to clasp them together. Ko herself felt dizzy, as if the ground had shifted beneath her. Captain Morrison seemed to understand their reaction. She waited, letting them absorb the information. Then she continued, her voice gentler. I know you have been told terrible things about what would happen if you were captured. I cannot speak to what you were told, but I can tell you what will happen here. You will be treated according to the Geneva Convention. You will receive medical care. You will receive adequate food and shelter. You will not be harmed. The translator's voice cracked slightly on the last sentence, as if he too found it hard to believe these words, in the context of war. Ko wanted to believe it. Every cell in her body wanted to believe it. But 3 years of war had taught her that words were cheap and promises meant nothing. She would believe it when she saw it. The examination will begin shortly, Captain Morrison continued. You will go one at a time to maintain your privacy. In the meantime, would anyone like water? Water, such a simple thing. Offered so casually, but Ko's mouth was suddenly dry. She hadn't had clean water in how long? Weeks? A month? The water on the ship had been brackish and foul. Before that, in the caves, they had drunk from streams contaminated with. She didn't let herself think about it. A nurse was already moving through the room with a tray, offering cups. Ko took one with both hands, afraid she might drop it. The water was clear. Ice floated in it. Ice. Ko stared at the impossible luxury. The frozen water that required electricity and machinery and abundance. She raised the cup to her lips. The first sip was so cold, it hurt her teeth. The second sip brought tears to her eyes. By the third, she was gulping, unable to stop herself, drinking until the cup was empty, and the cold settled into her stomach like a stone. Around her, other women were doing the same. Some crying openly now, the simple act of clean water breaking through defenses that months of hardship had failed to breach. The nurse refilled cups without comment, her face carefully neutral, giving them the dignity of their tears. Ko drank a second cup more slowly, forcing herself to stop before her shrunken stomach rebelled. The examination began. Women were called, one by one, led through a door at the front of the room. Each was gone, perhaps 20 minutes. They returned looking shell-shocked but not, Ko noted with careful attention, harmed, frightened still, perhaps confused, but walking on their own, speaking when spoken to. No one was dragged out, screaming. No one emerged injured. Each woman who returned provided evidence that challenged everything they had been told. Ko's name was called. Her legs felt weak as she stood, but she walked to the door, through it, into a corridor lined with more white walls. The nurse led her to a small examination room. Standard medical equipment. A table covered in white paper. Cabinets with glass doors showing supplies. A sink. A scale. Captain Morrison was waiting, along with a younger woman who was introduced as Lieutenant Chen, a medical assistant. The translator entered last, positioning himself discreetly near the door. "Please remove your outer clothing," the translator said, converting Captain Morrison's words. Ko's hands went to the buttons of her uniform. Her fingers trembled. This was the moment the propaganda had prepared her for. But the room was clinical, not threatening. The women were professional, not predatory. Ko removed her uniform top, then her skirt, standing in undergarments that were more holes than fabric. The shame of her condition hit her harder than fear. Captain Morrison's face remained carefully neutral. "Lieutenant Chen will check your scalp for lice," the translator said. Gentle hands parted Ko's hair, section by section. Ko closed her eyes, expecting disgust, expecting roughness. Instead, Lieutenant Chen's touch was methodical and surprisingly kind. "Extensive infestation," she said in English. Captain Morrison nodded, making notes on her clipboard. "We'll handle that shortly. Please step on the scale." Ko had avoided scales for months, knowing what they would reveal. Now she had no choice. The numbers meant nothing to her, calibrated in pounds rather than kilograms. But she saw Captain Morrison's jaw tighten, saw her make another note. "Severe malnutrition," she said quietly, more to herself than anyone else. The examination continued. Height measured, blood pressure taken, the cuff tight on her thin arm. Heart and lungs listened to with a stethoscope, so cold, Ko gasped. Reflexes tested with a small rubber hammer. Captain Morrison worked with quiet efficiency, her hands gentle but thorough, examining every visible sign of Ko's 3 years at war. The wounds that had healed wrong, the scars from shrapnel poorly extracted. The infected tooth she had lived with for a year because there was no dentist, no anesthetic, no way to fix it. Captain Morrison documented everything in silence, her pen moving across the paper in quick, precise strokes. Finally, she stepped back. "You can dress now," the translator said. Ko pulled on her clothes, the fabric feeling even more threadbare after the exposure. Captain Morrison spoke, her tone matter-of-fact, but not unkind. "You have several medical issues that require treatment. The infected tooth will need to be extracted. You have intestinal parasites that will be treated with medication. Your malnutrition will be addressed with a special diet. But first, we will address the lice." She gestured to Lieutenant Chen, who opened a cabinet and removed several items. Scissors, bottles of clear liquid, white towels. Ko understood before the translator spoke. They were going to cut her hair. 18 months of growth, matted and infested as it was, represented the last vestige of her vanity, the last connection to who she had been before the war. "It will grow back," Captain Morrison said, as if reading her thoughts. The translator's voice was gentle. "And it will grow back clean." Clean. That word again, carrying so much weight. Ko nodded. Lieutenant Chen draped a towel around her shoulders and began to cut. The scissors made soft, snipping sounds. Dark hair fell to the floor in clumps, taking with it the lice, the eggs, the months of misery. Ko watched it accumulate around her feet, feeling lighter with each cut. When Lieutenant Chen finished, Ko's hair was perhaps 2 inches long, cropped close to her skull. She raised a hand to touch it, felt the unfamiliar bristle. "Now, the treatment," Captain Morrison said. The clear liquid smelled sharp and chemical, but not unpleasant. Lieutenant Chen applied it carefully, working it into Ko's scalp with gloved hands. It tingled, then burned slightly, but Ko didn't care. Burn away every last one of them. After the chemical treatment came a shower. A real shower. Not the bucket of cold water she had grown accustomed to. Lieutenant Chen showed her how to operate the controls, then left, giving her privacy that felt almost as precious as the hot water. Ko stood under the spray, letting it beat against her cropped head, her shoulders, her back. The water was hot enough to sting, and she welcomed the pain because it meant being warm for the first time in months. Soap had been provided. Real soap, not the gritty sand they had used in the caves. Ko lathered and rinsed again, unable to believe she could use as much as she wanted. The water at her feet ran gray, then brown, then finally clear. When she emerged, wrapped in a towel that was rough but clean, she found new clothes waiting. Not a uniform, but simple civilian clothing. A cotton dress, undergarments, socks, shoes that were worn but serviceable. Ko dressed slowly, feeling the clean fabric against her clean skin. A sensation so unfamiliar, it was almost uncomfortable. When she returned to the classroom, the other women stared. She must look as different to them as they looked to her, those who had already been through the process. Clean, short-haired, dressed in clothes that fit, the transformation was staggering. Ko found an empty seat and waited for the process to complete. One by one, the women went through what Ko had experienced. Each emerged looking shell-shocked by kindness, unable to reconcile the care they had received with the horrors they had been promised. By late afternoon, all 47 women had been processed. They sat in that classroom looking like different people. And perhaps they were. Captain Morrison returned, accompanied by the translator and several other medical personnel. "You will now be moved to your quarters," the translator said. "You will receive dinner and be allowed to rest. Tomorrow, you will begin treatment for your medical conditions. You will be given work assignments appropriate to your health status. You will be treated according to international law." The words washed over Ko like the water had, cleansing away layers of fear. Work assignments. Not torture, not death. Work. The ordinary mundanity of it felt revolutionary. They filed out of the building into the golden light of late afternoon. The sun felt different than it had that morning, warm rather than threatening. They were led to another building. this one clearly a dormitory. Inside were rows of beds, each with clean linens, a pillow, a blanket. Real beds. Ko hadn't slept in a real bed in 3 years. A woman near Ko touched the mattress tentatively, as if it might disappear. Another sat down heavily and simply stared at the pillow. Ko chose a bed near a window. The view showed the compound. Other buildings, a courtyard, a fence. They were still prisoners. The fence was still there. But it felt different now. A boundary rather than a trap. Protection rather than imprisonment. Or perhaps she was simply too tired to think clearly, too overwhelmed by the day's events to analyze them properly. Dinner arrived on metal trays. Rice, vegetables, fish. The portions were generous. And Ko had to force herself to eat slowly, knowing her stomach couldn't handle too much at once. Around her, other women were doing the same, eating with careful restraint despite obvious hunger. Some couldn't manage it, paid the price later, rushing to the bathroom with stomach cramps. Ko finished half her tray and set it aside, already feeling uncomfortably full. As evening fell, the lights came on, electric lights that didn't flicker or smoke. Ko lay in her bed, clean and fed and warm, and tried to process the impossible day. This morning she had expected torture. Instead, she had received medical care. She had expected death. Instead, she had received clean clothes and food. She had expected Americans to be monsters. Instead, they had been professional, efficient, and occasionally kind. Everything she had been taught was wrong. Or if not wrong, then at least incomplete. Had prepared her for cruelty but not for this clinical kindness, this systematic care. It was more disorienting than brutality would have been. At least brutality she understood. This required her to reconsider everything. Around her, women were settling into their beds. Some were crying quietly. Some were talking in low voices. Ko heard fragments of conversation. Did you see? I never thought. What happens tomorrow? What did happen tomorrow? More medical treatment, the translator had said. Work assignments. Ko tried to imagine working again. Doing something productive rather than just surviving. The thought felt foreign, but not unpleasant. Before the war, she had been a nurse, a good one, she thought. She had cared about her patients, took pride in her work. That person felt very distant now, separated by years of war and survival. Could she be that person again? Did she want to be? The question circled in her mind as exhaustion finally pulled her under. She slept and dreamed of clean water, of soap and towels, of hands that touched with professional care rather than violence. She woke once in the night, disoriented, reaching instinctively for the knife she had carried. In the caves. But there was no knife. There were no caves. There was just a bed, clean sheets, and the sound of other women breathing in the darkness. Ko lay back down and forced her breathing to slow. Safe. She was safe. The words felt like a lie, but she repeated them anyway. Safe. The morning brought a breakfast of rice porridge, toast, and tea. Real tea, not the bitter grass substitutes they had used in the caves. Ko ate slowly, her stomach still, adjusting to regular food. After breakfast, they were assembled in the courtyard. The morning was cool, the sky overcast, typical San Francisco weather. Ko pulled her cardigan closer, grateful to have it. Captain Morrison appeared, along with several other officers. The translator stepped forward. You will now receive work assignments, he said. These assignments are based on your skills and health status. Those with medical training will work in the hospital. Those with clerical skills will work in administration. Those without specific training will work in the laundry or kitchens. Ko's heart jumped. Medical training. She could work as a nurse again. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. What if she had forgotten everything? What if 3 years of improvisation had destroyed her proper training? What if she wasn't good enough anymore? Names were called alphabetically. When Ko heard hers, she stepped forward on legs that felt unsteady. Medical training? The translator asked. Yes, Ko said. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. She cleared her throat and tried again. Yes, I was a surgical nurse in Manila. The translator converted her words. Captain Morrison, who had been consulting with other officers, looked up. Her eyes met Ko's across the courtyard. Surgical nurse, she repeated in English, then said something to the translator. You will report to the base hospital. The translator said. Captain Morrison will supervise your orientation. Ko nodded, not trusting her voice. Surgical nurse. She would be a surgical nurse again. The assignments continued. Some women were clearly relieved by their assignments. Others looked disappointed, though they hid it quickly. Ko understood. In a world where you had lost everything, being valued for your skills felt like reclaiming a piece of your identity. When the assignments were complete, they were divided into groups and led to their respective workplaces. Ko's group, 15 women with medical backgrounds, followed Captain Morrison across the compound. The hospital was a large building, multiple stories, with the Red Cross emblem painted on its roof. Inside, the familiar smell of disinfectant mixed with something else, something Ko recognized from her years in Manila, suffering. Pain had a smell, she had learned. Blood, fear, bodies pushed beyond their limits. This hospital smelled cleaner than Manila ever had. But the underlying scent was the same. They were led to a conference room where more medical personnel waited. Captain Morrison introduced them. Major Williams, the chief of surgery. Lieutenant Harris, head nurse. Dr. Chen, another Nisei translator, but this one with a medical degree. The presence of another Japanese face, even one in an American uniform, was oddly comforting. Major Williams spoke, his voice gruff but not unkind. Dr. Chen translated. You have been assigned here because we need medical personnel. The war has created a shortage of trained staff, and wounded soldiers continue to arrive daily. Your skills are needed. Needed. Ko felt something shift inside her chest. She was needed. Not just tolerated or processed or contained, but needed. You will work under supervision initially, Major Williams continued through Dr. Chen's translation. You will be paired with American nurses who will evaluate your skills and ensure patient safety. If you prove competent, you will receive more autonomy. Questions? Silence. Ko had 1,000 questions, but they all dissolved under the weight of the moment. She was going to nurse again. After 3 years of war, of survival, of living like animals in caves, she was going to nurse again. No questions? Good. Lieutenant Harris will show you to the changing rooms. You'll be issued uniforms and assigned to shifts. Your first shift begins this afternoon. This afternoon, Ko's hands began to shake again, but this time not from fear, from anticipation, from the terrifying prospect of doing something that mattered again. The changing room held rows of lockers and benches. Uniforms were provided. White dresses, white aprons, white caps with red crosses. Ko held the uniform against herself, feeling the crisp, clean fabric. It fit reasonably well, though it was loose on her still thin frame. She dressed slowly, her fingers fumbling with buttons and ties she hadn't used in years. Around her, other women were doing the same, transforming from prisoners into nurses. Ko caught her reflection in a small mirror on the wall. The woman looking back at her was a stranger. Short hair, hollow cheeks, but dressed in white. A nurse. She was a nurse again. Their first assignment was the recovery ward. Soldiers recently out of surgery, still groggy from anesthesia, needing monitoring and basic care. Ko was paired with a nurse named Betty. A woman in her 30s with kind eyes and capable hands. "Just follow my lead," Betty said through Dr. Chen, who stayed nearby for the first hour. "Watch how I check vitals, how I adjust the IV drips. Hospital protocol here might differ from what you're used to." Ko nodded, watching intently as Betty moved from bed to bed. The procedures were familiar but refined, with better equipment and more supplies than Ko had ever had in Manila. After watching for 30 minutes, Betty gestured Ko forward. "Your turn. Check this patient's vitals. His name is Private Johnson. He had an appendectomy this morning." Ko approached the bed. Private Johnson was young, perhaps 20. His face pale against the white pillow. He was awake but drowsy, his eyes unfocused. Ko picked up the chart at the foot of his bed, reading the familiar notations. Temperature, blood pressure, pulse. She pulled out a thermometer, and Private Johnson's eyes focused on her face. His expression changed. Fear? Confusion? Ko kept her own face neutral, professional. "Temperature," she said in English. One of the words she knew. She placed the thermometer under his tongue, her movements gentle and practiced. Private Johnson's body remained tense, but he didn't resist. They waited in awkward silence. Ko counted seconds in her head, watching the clock on the wall. When enough time had passed, she removed the thermometer, read it, made a notation on the chart. Normal. Blood pressure next. Ko wrapped the cuff around Private Johnson's arm, pumped it up, listened with the stethoscope. The familiar ritual calmed her. This, she knew. This, she could do. The numbers were good. She made another notation. "Okay," she said, because she didn't know how to say, "Your vitals are normal" in English. But Private Johnson seemed to understand. Some of the tension left his shoulders. He even managed a weak nod. Ko moved to the next bed. This patient was older, a sergeant with bandages covering half his face. Burns, Ko guessed from the way the dressings were applied. He was asleep, which made things easier. No eye contact, no tension. She checked his vitals, adjusted his blanket, made her notations. Betty watched from across the ward, nodding approval. By the end of the shift, Ko had checked 20 patients. Her hands remembered the work, even if her mind still struggled with the context. These were American soldiers, enemy soldiers, but they were also just young. Men, hurt and scared and far from home. Not so different from the Japanese soldiers she had treated in Manila. War made everyone the same, in the end. Broken bodies needing care, regardless of the flag they fought under. At the end of her shift, Betty pulled her aside. "You're good," she said through Dr. Chen. "Really good. Your hands are steady, and you know what you're doing." "Where did you train?" Ko answered through Dr. Chen, her voice stronger now. "Tokyo University Hospital, then Manila General. I specialized in surgical nursing." Betty's eyebrows rose. "Tokyo University? That's one of the best programs in Asia. We're lucky to have you." "Lucky to have you." The word settled into Ko's chest, warm and unfamiliar. When was the last time anyone had considered themselves lucky to have her? She couldn't remember. That night, lying in her dormitory bed, Ko tried to process the day. She had worked in an American hospital. She had cared for American soldiers. And it had felt right. Natural. Like coming home after a long absence. Around her, other women from the hospital shift were having similar conversations. "Did you see the way they looked at us at first?" one woman whispered. "Like we might poison them or something." "But by the end," another added, "some of them were actually grateful. One soldier even said thank you. In Japanese. He must have learned it somewhere." Ko thought about Private Johnson, about how his fear had gradually given way to acceptance. How the sergeant with the burns had woken near the end of her shift, and, seeing her checking his IV, had just closed his eyes again. not in fear, but in trust. He had trusted her to care for him. The weight of that trust was immense. Dinner, sleep. She grew stronger, her body slowly recovering from years of malnutrition. Her hands steadied. Her mind cleared. She learned more English, picking up medical terms and basic phrases. Her relationship with Betty deepened into something like friendship, though neither spoke the other's language fluently. They communicated through gestures, demonstrations, and the occasional help of Dr. Chen. One morning, 6 weeks after her arrival, Captain Morrison called Ko to her office. Ko went with her heart pounding, unable to shake the instinct that being summoned meant trouble. Captain Morrison gestured for her to sit. The translator was present, which only increased Ko's anxiety. "Miss Tanaka," Captain Morrison began, her tone formal, not unkind. "I've been reviewing your performance over the past 6 weeks. The reports from Betty and other staff have been consistently positive. Your skills are excellent, your bedside manner is professional, and you've shown genuine care for your patients." Ko waited for the other shoe to drop. Praise in her experience always preceded bad news. Therefore, Captain Morrison continued, "I'm recommending that you be moved from supervised status to full nursing privileges. You'll have your own patient assignments, though you'll still work under the general oversight of the head nurse." Ko stared at her, certain she had misunderstood. The translator repeated the words in Japanese. "Full nursing privileges. Not supervised, not restricted. Trusted." Thank you," Ko managed. The words felt inadequate, but she didn't know how else to express the magnitude of what this meant. Captain Morrison smiled slightly. "You've earned it, Miss Tanaka. That's all. That's all." As if trust were something simple, something that could be earned rather than bestowed. As if Ko were a person rather than an enemy. The distinction shouldn't have mattered as much as it did. Ko returned to the ward, walking on air. Betty noticed immediately. "Good news?" she asked through gestures and expression. Ko nodded, then found the English words. "Full privilege. No more supervise." Betty's face broke into a genuine smile. "That's wonderful. You deserve it." She clasped Ko's hands briefly, a gesture of congratulation that transcended language. That afternoon, Ko took her first solo patient assignment. A young corporal with a leg wound, nervous about an upcoming surgery. Ko sat with him, used her limited English and her considerable experience to explain what would happen, to offer reassurance. He listened, and she saw, the moment his fear eased, saw him choose to trust her. It was a small moment, insignificant in the grand scheme of the war, but to Ko, it felt like everything. Winter came to San Francisco. Ko had never experienced cold like this. Wet and penetrating, so different from Manila's tropical warmth. The hospital provided warmer clothing, wool, sweaters and coats. And Ko learned to layer her clothes against the damp. Christmas approached, a holiday she barely understood. The hospital decorated, paper chains made by patients, a tree in the main ward, carols sung by volunteers. Ko watched it all with a mixture of curiosity and distance. This wasn't her holiday. But then, Betty invited her to a small gathering in the nurses' quarters on Christmas Eve. "Come," Betty said, gesturing encouragingly. "You're part of the staff now." "Part of the staff." Ko went, uncertain what to expect. The gathering was small, perhaps a dozen nurses sharing cookies and hot cider. They welcomed Ko without fuss, making space for her on a worn sofa. Someone handed her a cookie. Someone else offered cider. They sang carols, and though Ko didn't know the words, she hummed along. For a few hours, the war felt very far away. On Christmas morning, Ko woke to find a small package on her bed. Inside was a pair of warm gloves and a note in English. Ko took it to Dr. Chen to translate. Merry Christmas. Thank you for your excellent care. From the nursing staff. Ko stared at the gloves, practical and warm and chosen with thought. She had been seen, not just as a worker or a prisoner, but as a person who got cold like everyone else. The months passed. Winter gave way to spring. The war continued. A distant thunder that occasionally manifested in new patients, new wounds, new stories. Ko treated them all. Soldiers from Europe, soldiers from the Pacific, even a few Japanese-American soldiers who looked at her with complicated expressions she understood all too well. The war's end came not with a bang but with a series of announcements. Germany's surrender. Then, in August, news that made Ko's hands shake as she changed bandages. Japan had surrendered. The war was over. Ko stood in the middle of the hospital ward, surrounded by celebrating soldiers and nurses, and felt nothing but emptiness. The war was over. Japan had lost. Her country had lost. Everything she had believed in, everything she had fought for, had been for nothing. Betty found her later, sitting in the supply closet, staring at nothing. Betty sat down beside her without a word, just presence and patience. After a long time, Ko spoke. My country lost. Betty nodded. Yes, everything was for nothing. Betty was quiet for a moment. Then, not nothing. You saved lives. That's never nothing. Ko thought about the soldiers she had cared for. American soldiers, yes, but also just people. Young men who had thanked her in broken Japanese, who had trusted her with their fear and pain. Maybe Betty was right. Maybe some things transcended war. The weeks after surrender were chaotic. Discussions of repatriation, of what would happen to Japanese prisoners of war. Ko waited in limbo, continuing her work because it was the only thing that made sense anymore. Then, 3 months after the war's end, Captain Morrison called her to the office again. Miss Tanaka, she said, her tone formal. Arrangements are being made for repatriation. You'll be sent back to Japan within the month. However, she paused. There's another option. Several medical facilities in the area are desperately short of trained nurses. If you chose to stay, I could arrange a work visa and sponsorship. It's your choice. Ko sat in stunned silence.